This week's reading is entitled The Value of Philosophy. This piece first appeared as a chapter of a book written by the philosopher Bertrand Russell entitled The Problems of Philosophy. As its title suggests, Russell's purpose in this text is to defend the study of philosophy as a worthwhile endeavor. Russell's central thesis can be summed up to a great extent in a familiar claim. Philosophy opens our minds and expands our horizons. As stated, this idea is rather vague, but it does contain an important truth, and it is this truth which Russell expounds here. In this video, I'm going to unpack and discuss one particular paragraph from the text. There are two main reasons for this approach. First, the paragraph I'm going to discuss touches on some of the most important and interesting themes from Russell's article, themes which we will continue to think about this semester as we cover the trial and death of Socrates. Second, I hope that this will serve as an example of what it looks like to read a philosophical text slowly, carefully, and actively, of how to engage in close reading that seeks to expand and deepen rather than merely memorize the points made by the author. This skill is an integral part of what we hope to accomplish this semester. The passage I have in mind begins with the following. The value of philosophy is, in fact, to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or consent of his deliberate reason. To such a man, the world tends to become definite, finite, obvious. Common objects rouse no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. In this passage, Russell draws an important connection between philosophy and uncertainty. Initially, it may seem strange to highlight this if one's purpose is to convince the audience that studying philosophy is worthwhile. After all, philosophy, like other academic disciplines, poses questions and attempts to answer them. Ideally, we would think that this process would lead to an increase in certainty. We become more confident in the validity of certain truths than we were previously. Yet, if philosophy breeds uncertainty almost by its very nature, then we might think this would be a strike against it as an academic discipline. Why not spend one's time studying something that can provide us with more solid and demonstrable conclusions? Russell does not attempt to give his reader hope that philosophy will provide us with ultimate certainty about the questions it asks. Elsewhere in the article, he makes clear that this is not the case. Instead, Russell attempts to make a case for the value of philosophy by inviting us to reflect upon the value of uncertainty. Specifically, what is the alternative? What happens if a person assiduously avoids philosophical thinking and instead rests content in beliefs that provide ready-made established certainty? Russell tells us that such a person must derive his or her beliefs from sources independent of one's own reason, sources like common sense or the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation. Such a person's beliefs are determined entirely by the customs of his cultural, religious, or social group. Does God exist? Is abortion immoral? What happens after death? For the person without any tincture of philosophy, there is no need to think about these questions ourselves. The proper course has already been determined for us by the well-worn paths of tradition, custom, and ritual. The result, says Russell, is that we become imprisoned in prejudice. This is an imprisonment we can only escape through actively embracing some degree of uncertainty. But what exactly happens when we begin to think philosophically and embrace uncertainty? What positive outcome does this produce for us? Let's continue reading the paragraph. As soon as we begin to philosophize, on the contrary, we find that even the most everyday things lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. Philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. Russell introduces a significant concept here that I want to think about in greater detail. He tells us that it is only through philosophy and the diverse, although uncertain possibilities it suggests, that we can escape the tyranny of custom. Custom, that complex of intuitive, commonsensical, inherited, and socially sanctioned beliefs and ways of life that structure much of our lives, is here portrayed by Russell as something oppressive. It is something to be overcome through freedom of thinking and reason. In fact, Russell not only identifies our oppressor, but he also identifies our source of liberation. We see this in the closing portion of the paragraph. Russell writes that, "Thus, while diminishing our feeling of certainty as to what things are, it greatly increases our knowledge as to what they may be. It removes the somewhat arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and it keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect. Philosophy may make us less certain that we have the answers to life's most difficult questions, but it incurs this cost to make us more sensitive to different possibilities and heighten our sense of wonder. Furthermore, the liberating tool that Russell identifies is that of doubt. How do we free ourselves from the prison of prejudice that custom, habit, and tradition have ensnared us in? We allow ourselves to doubt the truth of customary beliefs, and to doubt the wisdom of traditional norms. We have then what we might call Russell's contrast, the tyranny of custom versus liberating doubt, one responsible for our repression while the other enables our freedom. Russell's piece, in my judgment at least, is well written, and it can be easy to get caught up in his rhetoric about the nobility of thinking freely, of opening one's mind, and throwing off the shackles of custom. That being said, however, I think it is also important to take a moment to think about the positive role that custom and tradition plays in our lives. Merely relying on how things have been done and what has always been believed is a sure recipe for stultification. At the same time, much of the way we think about and interact with the world is influenced by the gentle force of custom. We have daily routines that enable us to act efficiently without having to explicitly think through each decision. We are all inheritors of a rough, general morality that provides us with a broad framework for how to live. It is something inculcated in us by our parents and broader community, which we neither invented nor discovered. In fact, many of these beliefs about topics ranging from manners to morality to religion provide us with the social glue that enables us to live in community with others. This way of life is passed down through generations by our instinctive imitation of both authority figures and peers. That is, imitation initiates us into the customs and traditions of a particular way of life. Again, this shouldn't be taken to mean that customs should never be questioned. Many need serious reform. However, we should also recognize that relying on the general framework for life that custom provides is inevitable. Without some baseline sense of stability, the very act of criticizing customs would be impossible. No one can critically examine all their beliefs at once. Doubt may very well be needed to liberate us from falsehood, but doubt cannot be universal. We need a basic core of assumptions we take as true, at least for a time, before we begin to employ our critical eye. What then should we make of Russell's claim that custom is a tyrant, that doubt is our liberator? My sense is that Russell's criticism of custom isn't as extreme as it may appear on first read. Custom can tyrannize a person's mind if left wholly unchallenged. But that doesn't mean that the influence custom has upon us is necessarily tyrannical, any more than the influence a government has upon its citizens is necessarily tyrannical. Government can wield its power justly and within its proper bounds, or it can become overbearing and cruel. The use of power requires striking a balance between these legitimate and illegitimate uses. The same is true of the authority of custom. We need to recognize the necessary role that custom plays in our lives, while at the same time not becoming subservient and unthinking. Furthermore, Russell is right that philosophy is essential for avoiding the latter outcome. After all, philosophy is the art of thinking well about difficult questions. This leaves us with the following questions. When do we follow custom? When instead do we criticize and question custom? And in fact, these questions themselves can only be answered through engaging in the practice of philosophy itself.